You could walk around and just imagine what it was like 500 years ago. Cassie murmured, watching as Mr. Webber's attention drifted off into his memories. He seemed happy there. You know, I stayed in a small hotel near the Trevi Fountain, he said, suddenly seized by a memory. And they would bring me coffee in bed every morning, whether I wanted it or not, 7 a.m. sharp. A quick knock, and then the old woman who ran the place would march in, bang it down on the nightstand, and march out again. On my first morning, I was standing naked in the middle of the room, just contemplating getting dressed, and then she burst in, coffee in hand. She gave me one look, up and down, thoroughly unimpressed by what she saw, and walked back out again. He laughed at his memory. She saw me in my entirety. Oh my God, Cassie said, laughing with him. He studied her as she laughed, drawing a conclusion. I've told you that before, haven't I? No, she lied. I don't think so. You indulge me too much, Cassie. I've turned into one of those old people who bores youngsters with their stories. A good story is just as good the second time round, she said. He shook his head as if annoyed at himself. Do you still travel, Mr. Webber? Cassie asked, pulling him away from his annoyance. Oh, I never go anywhere now, he said. Too old and too weak. I doubt I'd survive a long flight. He clasped his hands over his stomach and stared at the table, lost in that thought. That's a bit morbid, Cassie said. Realistic, he said, smiling. He looked at her seriously then. It's important to be realistic. Life is like a train that just keeps getting faster and faster, and the sooner you realize that, the better. I am hurtling towards the final stop, I know that. But I've lived my life and I've got no complaints. But young people like you, Cassie, you must get out and see the world while you can. There is so much to see beyond these four walls. Don't let the world pass you by. I've seen plenty, Mr. Webber, don't worry about that, Cassie said, uncomfortable with the conversation turning towards her. She nodded at the books under her arm. Let me take these through the back before my arm falls off. She headed past the coffee counter, now closed for the day, and through to the windowless cave of boxes and staff lockers in the back room. She dropped the books on the cluttered desk for Mrs. K to deal with the following day when she opened up. Cassie, I wasn't trying to tell you how to live your life, Mr. Webber said when she reappeared, his expression serious. I hope I didn't insult you. Insult me? Cassie asked, genuinely puzzled. Don't be silly. I didn't give it a second thought. Well, what I mean to say, really, is please don't let Mrs. Kellner know that I was suggesting you might abandon her and her bookstore. She would ban you for life, Cassie said, grinning. But don't worry, I won't say anything, and I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. As she tidied mugs and plates from the tables, Cassie looked around the store, the place she had worked ever since arriving in New York City 6 years earlier. It was everything a bookstore should be, with shelves and tables laden with books, soft music always playing in the background, and lights dangling on cables from the high ceiling, creating spots of brightness and cozy gloom. There were comfy chairs in corners and in between the shelves, and mismatched artwork on the walls. The paint hadn't been redone in 10 years, and the shelves had probably been first bought in the 1960s, but it felt appropriately shabby rather than run down. It was a comfortable place, the sort of store that felt familiar the first time you stepped through the door. She nodded down at Mr. Webber's coffee cup. Do you want a last refill before I close up? I've had more than enough, he said, shaking his head. I'll be up and down like an elevator all night to pee. Cassie pulled a face, half amused, half disgusted. I offer you a window into the life of an old person, Mr. Webber said, unapologetic. It's a constant pleasure. Now give me a few minutes to gather my strength, and then I'll be out of your way. Take as long as you want, she said. It's nice to have the company at the end of the day. Yes, Mr. Webber agreed, gazing down at the table, his hand resting on the cover of his book.